Can't you just call in and we do like the speakerphone or something like that?
Do we have another mode? Because we can't understand anything she's saying.
Because the speakerphones are pretty good.
Is this any better?
You want to try my phone?
Yeah. We're not just huddle.
Got the best signal.
Hey, Jessica. The internet connection is really not coming through, so I've got you on speakerphone.
Great, okay, perfect.
So you're just going to have to articulate, okay?
Okay, absolutely, I will do my best, I apologize. I'm gonna go ahead and just mute myself on this, just so if it starts coming through, it doesn't mess things up. Okay. All right, is that better?
Yep.
That will work. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great, good afternoon, and I apologize for the technical difficulties, and thank you for allowing me to present to you all virtually. It is a committee meeting week in Tallahassee, so I am here attending meetings, and this is really helpful that you all were able to accommodate. I wanted to give you all just the kind of lay of the land as to where we are right now in the legislative process, and let you know kind of what my reading the tea leaves, myself and my team, what we think we are going to be looking at this year when it comes to legislative and fiscal priorities for the legislature and the governor. I'll start with policy issues, if I may. One big issue that we know is on the forefront of the legislative leadership and the governor's minds is educational scholarship accounts. Of course, we've seen throughout the country, there are some examples where this has already taken place. I believe Arizona is one of the leading states with educational scholarship accounts. And what that will exactly look like, we're not entirely sure. So you could go so far as to essentially every student having an account that is worth a certain amount of money that they could then go to various providers, kind of like an a la carte option, if you will, to get the educational services that their parents would like for them. Or it may be more restrictive. We, of course, currently have our scholarship accounts, where there are only certain folks that can participate in that. That's based on an income-based level. And then the legislature did add law enforcement officers to that group as well, of people whose children can participate. So that's where we are right now. We expect that to be expanded in some way. We have not seen any bill out right now. That's not uncommmo when there are priorities for legislative leadership. That tends to come later in the process. We see those bills more towards the end of the legislative session. This week is currently the third committee week that we are having here in Tallahassee leading up to the legislative session. We will have one more in January, 3 more in February, and then the legislature will convene session at the very beginning of March. So we do still have a little bit of time to come, and we'll expect to see some of those policy bills later in the process.
Excuse me, Jessica. I'm
Sure.
sorry. I have a question. You said it's committee week. Did they reassign the new committee chairs for the House and the Senate as far as like the education and education appropriations? Or are they the same
Yes.
people?
Yes, thank you. I should have led with that. Thank you very much. Yes, with the new legislative leadership in place, we do have new committee chairs. So our new legislative leadership is Senate President Kathleen Passidomo. She is from the Lee County area. And then leading the House is our House Speaker Paul Renner, who is from St. John. So you think kind of that Jacksonville area of the state. They get to choose who they would like to have as leadership under their tenure. And in the Senate, our Education Policy Committee is going to be led by Senator Corey Simon, who is a senator from actually up here in the Leon County and surrounding county areas. Our Appropriations Committee on the Senate side, Education Appropriations, is Senator Perry. For any of you that have been involved in this process for a while, that name may sound familiar. He has served on education committees in the past, and he is from Alachua, Marion County, that area of the state. On the House side, and this is actually good news for you all, our Education Pre-K-12 Appropriations Subcommittee is led by Representative Tom Cow, who's of course has Osceola as part of her delegation. So it's always nice to have a member of your delegation leading committees that you care about because they can look out for your district. And then in the House, because the House is larger in that it has more members, they have more committees. So we have a big education overall committee that is going to be led by Representative Osceola, who's from the Citrus County area. And then we have two subcommittees that we will primarily watch. We have the Ed Quality Subcommittee that is run by Representative Trabulsi, and then the Choice and Innovation, which is run by Representative Tuck, who is from the Heartland areas, I think around Lake Okeechobee. She has served on our education committees in the past, and this is her first time being a subcommittee chair. So those will be the folks who guide the bills through their various committees. And something we do have a little different this year on the Senate side is the Education Committee is just pre-K-12 education, and they do have a separate committee for higher education. In the Senate, that is not the way it has always been, and that has meant that time had to be spent with both our world in pre-K-12 and then also in higher ed. Now, our policy committee will be solely focused on pre-K-12 issues. So we expect to see a lot of these types of bills come through those committees. Another major issue that has continued to be an issue, and I know you all have worked on this as a board, is school safety. Of course, ever since 2018 with the terrible shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, we have seen first in that year a pretty broad school safety bill that did a lot of things. And then in the subsequent years, the commission has provided recommendations to the legislature for things that they would like to see changed or added to that those statutory requirements for school safety. One major issue that we've heard a lot of discussion about is school guardians. And I know you all, I believe, have a school guardian program, so this may not impact you as much, but there are 21 school districts that do not have a guardian program currently. And the commission has recommended that every district have such a program. So we expect that that may be something that we see as a bill during the legislative session. Another school safety related issue is, of course, data, student data, how it's shared between school districts, how it's shared with the department, how it's protected, and that has come up as well during the commission meetings. So we may see some legislation, a school safety bill that looks at issues of data privacy and how the information that we collect, or is collected rather, is protected from the student perspective, but then also shared with the folks that need that information so that we can be doing things to ensure that students are safe. Another major issue that I think is one that all 67 districts are dealing with, and that is teacher and employee shortages. We are looking at a pretty dramatic teacher shortage across the state. And there has been a lot of discussion about what can be done legislatively to help encourage more students when they graduate from college, or individuals who perhaps are pursuing another career to maybe give education a chance and decide to become a teacher. So we are looking at that. We expect that we will see some type of legislation dealing with that issue. It could be a policy related issue in that you could create programs that maybe would encourage students in universities to take this path, or individuals to leave their current profession to come and be a teacher. There's of course always a fiscal angle to this too. Could the legislature provide more dollars so then we can pay teachers or encourage people to come into the profession? So we expect to hear all of those ideas discussed during the legislative session. And then lastly, this is kind
Jessica,
of a
on
new
that-
issue that we have only heard a few, I'm sorry.
Yeah, on that point, before you get too far ahead, do you hear, because what it sounds like the legislature is doing is having like a high degree of emphasis on recruiting new teachers or increasing starting salaries of teachers. Do you hear anything about maybe like on retention of veteran teachers or increasing the flexibility of the school districts to pay their veteran teachers a little bit more? Do you hear anything about that, any kind of those or along those lines?
I would say for the first time in a number of years, I have actually heard more discussion about that. When they first rolled out the teacher salary allocation, which of course provided dollars to bump up that starting salary, at first there really was not an appetite, I'll be honest. It seemed like, that was the focus, the primary focus was getting that starting salary. As we progressed, and I know you all have of course been dealing with this as a board, it has created a compression where you have folks that have been in the profession for a number of years who are now making only minimally more than your starting teachers. And of course that does hurt with recruitment and also, morale and other issues like that. So that has been shared, and I will say this, I'm hearing more of an understanding and perhaps an openness to have some flexibility there to try to be able to also compensate those folks that you have had that are your experienced teachers.
Thank you.
Thank you. The last kind of policy issue that I wanted to mention, and this is very early stages, this is more what we're just kind of hearing talk about, is looking at dual enrollment. There are some state colleges and other colleges that would like to be able to offer, kind of be the sole providers of dual enrollment. We certainly know we have our own programs. Most districts offer their own courses and may also partner with other state colleges and universities. Obviously, whatever is proposed, we would certainly not want to see a lack of choice for our students. And if you all have robust programs that are very successful, we certainly would not want those to be eliminated. So we're watching that. Again, that is not a bill that I've seen. There's no language anywhere. This is just kind of discussions that we're hearing in Tallahassee. Of course, money is always important, and we are in the early stages of the budgetary process. The way it works is the first bit of movement on the budget comes from the governor. He is required to have his recommended budget 30 days before the legislative session. That would make it early February, though I will say this governor tends to be earlier. We've seen it before the required date. And certainly now that he has been in office for 4 years, he has staff already in place. I would guess that we will see it sooner rather than later, just because that has been what we've seen in the last couple of years. His budget, of course, is just that. It's just a recommendation. The legislature is the one who ultimately develops the budget. But this legislature works very well with the governor. They have all worked together for their various priorities, and they have been eager to support one another's priorities for the most part. So it will be a good building block for us to just get an idea of the lay of the land. We'll see what the governor is interested in pursuing. His priorities will be embedded within that budget, because we'll see, okay, he wants to put a lot of money here in this program, in that program, that sort of thing. And it kind of just gives us a starting place for the budget. When we're looking at numbers, fortunately, they are really positive right now. So for months and months and months now, our revenues have continued to exceed what the projections were. So month to month, we've continued to have more dollars coming into the state than our revenue estimates had normally projected. So that means that the legislature certainly has the opportunity to add funds to K-12 education or any other programs that they see fit. They will also, of course, continue to put money in reserves. They've been very cautious about doing that because, of course, when you are dependent on sales tax, things can happen like hurricanes or other types of events that could really disrupt our economy. So they've taken a very conservative approach to make sure that we have a good amount in reserves. But all in all, it's a much better way to come into a legislative session rather than coming in and saying, oh goodness, we're not bringing in near what we thought we were. We're going to have to make some cuts. So all in all, it's a more positive environment than we have perhaps seen in the past. So it'll all come down to what their priorities are and how they wish to spend those dollars. I have sent you all in the last week or so just a brief email about FRS. We just wanted to make sure that you all were aware that there was a report that came out that discussed how in this last year the FRS lost about 6% of its value. But to put that in context, the year prior to that, it grew almost 29%. So we're still in a net positive, even though it did lose some ground last year, which is not anything solely due to the FRS or the way it's structured or anything like that. That was kind of investments overall in the last year. So it's still in a strong position. We do recommend just keeping an eye on that because there could be, the legislature could use that information from that report to decide to increase employer rates for FRS, which would then be something that you all would have to contend with as a board. So that's just something we're keeping an eye on. Again, not anything that's definite just yet, but just something that we like to keep you all thinking about so that when you go to build your budget, you have an idea of what maybe to expect from the budget when the legislature ultimately writes it. This year, because we are it's a quote-unquote normal session, meaning that it starts in March and ends in May, we will not have that budget until May. So when it comes to you all in developing then your budget for the next school year, it's a shorter timeline. The only good part of that is we are closer to that date, and so we are more confident in the revenues that we are building the budget on, if that makes sense. So you may recall, actually in 2020, session ended in March, and I think a week or so after session ended was when we had the shutdown for COVID. So that had a lot of economic uncertainty. Fortunately, we were able to get through that as a state, but things like that can happen, and if you've built a budget on those numbers and then the legislature has to come back and revise, it can be a challenge. So the May budget date is sometimes preferable for that reason. So we won't see the legislature begin work on their budget until April, but what we will continue to do in the interim is provide you all with information about the revenue estimates as they come in, let you know if we continue to exceed expectations, so you can just have an idea of what the pot of money is going to look like that they are working with. And we will, of course, also do the same with the FRS. I know there were some priorities that you all had highlighted already as legislative priorities for the district, so I just wanted to mention those briefly. Of course, the compression funding, so we're talking about compression kind of in two different ways. First, we have the hold harmless compression funding, which provides additional dollars to Osceola County schools. That's positive. That is something that has been a year-to-year process. It is not recurring. It is something we have to fight for every year to get. So that is certainly a priority to continue to get those funds for the district. Thinking about compression in a different way, we do have the issues of salary compression, both with the teachers, as you mentioned before, with new teachers' salaries getting raised to a level where now we have veteran teachers who are making very close to the same amount as new teachers. That is, of course, an issue, and you would like to be able to reward those veteran teachers as well. So there's compression there. And then also with the minimum wage requirements, as you bumped up individuals to, or as we work through the process to get folks to the minimum wage, folks that were already at that level, of course, would like to see an increase as well. So there's compression issues there that we are sharing with the legislature so that they understand those pressures as you all try to negotiate with the dollars you have to make sure that you're rewarding all of your employees. And then last but not least, looking at the DCD and maintaining that. Every couple of years we see a bit of a fight about the DCD with districts that argue that it costs more to live in those areas and therefore they need more dollars. We see that right now and again, and so your position to maintain where you are is what we would be fighting for on your behalf this year with those priorities in place. One thing I do want to mention about the budget is there are options that the legislature can do. They can add money to the BSA, which is essentially the most flexible money that you can have. So if you all see an increase in the BSA, assuming there's not any kind of caveat attached to it, which we have seen from time to time, those are dollars that the board would then have more of an ability to control where you send those dollars. Categorical funds like safety, transportation, instructional materials, those are designated for that purpose. So while it's always welcome to have additional dollars anywhere and everywhere, the categorical funds are more limited because they're very targeted. In the Department of Education's legislative budget request, which is again a request, it is not anything that is set in stone, they did recommend actual increases in transportation and school safety. So that clearly is something that they are looking at. We know there have been dramatic differences in transportation costs versus what you all receive from the state. So that is something at least that the department was recommending. We'll look and see if the governor follows suit and then also the legislature. But certainly money that is flexible from the increases in the BSA allows you all to have very localized priorities and look at those dollars and spend them as you see it fit as a board.
Does the transportation categorical allow for school bus driver salaries too? Or just the buying of buses and maintenance and fuel?
Yeah, transportation costs, and because it's been so, to be honest with you, woefully underfunded really since the recession, 2008-9, it really does not seem to cover even the majority of just the maintenance of the buses and that sort of thing. So those costs have just skyrocketed, as of course as fuel.
Right. When is the bill drafting deadline? Because I know it looks like you said, there's been a lot of bills already filed. When is the deadline for each rep or senator to submit the bills for the coming session?
Sure. So the House and the Senate both do have different rules. They have time into session, but then when session begins, they both have different dates as to when they can and can't have bills filed. What's interesting, particularly on the House side, we tend to see more major priorities for the Speaker or other legislative leaders tend to come in the form of a committee bill, which because it's a committee bill, it doesn't have the same type of rules about filing, if that makes sense. But House members do have a limited number of bills that they can file. Senators can file an unlimited amount. So House members do have to use more discretion when it comes to what bills they choose to file, because they only have a handful that they can actually file on their own. So we can get through committee meetings. There is still time to file bills, but on the House side in particular, one of the biggest issues is their slots filling up. That they have too many issues and they decide there are 6 bills and then they don't have any other options.
And that's a great point, because I know also the House is a little bit different than the Senate, that when they ask for an appropriation, they may not count against their bills that they're slotted, but they have to have like a procedure for that. You know, there's like a questionnaire that the Speaker had made them fill out, like, did they have like any public hearings, this and that? Is that a separate, I'm only talking about not for like bill drafting, but just for an appropriation. So if they want to do a line item specific.
That's exactly right. So the House follows a process where their appropriations that they put in do get an actual bill number, but you are correct, that doesn't count towards those policy bills that they file, but it does have to follow more of a traditional bill process in the sense that the bill will go through let's say it's an education related issue, it would go through the Pre-K-12 Appropriations Committee before it then went to the big appropriations committees when they meet during the latter part of session to build the budget. But if it doesn't go through that committee process, it cannot even be considered to be part of the budget. So it is, that's another kind of time crunch issue. There are, as you might imagine, many bills, appropriation bills that are filed. And so one of the biggest challenges for members is ensuring that their bills make it through just that committee process so that it can even be considered to be part of the budget. And the Senate is not quite the same. They don't really have to file a bill. They can just, it is handled more through the actual appropriations committee process when we get to the latter part of session.
Right. And my last question would be then, do we have or can we get a list of appropriation bills that were filed last year that were specific to education? Because those are specific members saying, hey, I want this money to go to a special project. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to see how successful that was in the education realm. Because I know.
Sure.
Oh, we do have that?
John sent it.
Okay. Okay, never mind. I'm getting told by the chairwoman that we can get that list. So.
Perfect. And if for some reason you all don't have it, just let me know. I'd be happy to send that to you. And you'll see it is a pretty large number of bills that were filed, and then you can then whittle it down to the ones that actually made it into the final appropriations bill, and then whittle it even more for the ones when the governor makes his line item veto. So it is a challenging process, but it's why it's good to have some good legislative champions in your delegation.
Right, and because I would do with that, because this is a workshop, not just for you, Jessica, but just in general, because I would like to see what that pattern is. You know, like if they're education related that made it to this, that survived the governor's veto, but they all happen to be like safety related. Then we know that we could possibly ask for an appropriation for safety. I mean, like, let's not ask for something that hasn't been through the process, because the governor probably has his own idea of what appropriations can go through, because I think that we should this year ask for an appropriation specifically for our county. But I don't want to reinvent the wheel. Like, if the governor has his own way of vetting these appropriation bills and saying what's going to be successful, I think we should look at what's successful and try to ask for something unique for us. That was the purpose of that. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.
Jessica, I have questions about items 1 and 2 that you went over, school safety, the Guardians program. So do you know, like, how they are thinking about implementing compulsory guardians for every district?
That is what we've heard, that they, and I don't know if it would just be a mandate, you know, saying, hey, tied to the state school dollars, that, hey, with these funds, you will first ensure that you have a guardian program. That sounded a little bit more like the way they were going, but we have not seen any actual legislation thus far, but just based on the conversations. Now, for those districts that already have that, you would already meet that requirement should that be the way they choose to implement it.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I could just add, Jessica, in the last meeting between superintendents and Commissioner Diaz, his advocacy for guardian programs is bigger than we currently have. Because he is a champion for more people with guns on school campuses to increase response times and safety. Our model is just now that we work with our law enforcement agencies to have SROs in district managed schools, and then they have a guardian program in our charter schools. But still in those charter schools, it's only one guardian per campus right now that I'm aware of, unless they've added them. So that's just something to consider. He is a champion for more presence with guns on school campuses.
Madam Chair, you should also note that there's significant push from SHERS to get this passed.
Thank you for that, all of you. And then with regards to the student account scholarships, I know that you said that they're looking to expand that, and you mentioned Arizona as being a model or one of the states that has the most open scholarship programs. Do you know what their program is? Like, how are they implementing that in Arizona, or have you heard of how they intend to expand it in Florida?
I don't know many of the details about the Arizona program. I just had someone send me that legislation so I can take a look at it and get more information about it. And when I do, I'd be happy to share, because we have heard that that may be the basis. The ultimate idea is essentially the money following the student. And that can be as narrow or as broad as I suppose the legislature wants it to be. So you could put parameters on it about what these dollars could very specifically be used for. You know, I think about in the McKay Scholarship Program, which looks at students with disabilities, there were listed things that the monies could be used for. They could be used for tuition at a school, they could be used for certain therapies, that sort of thing. Or it could be even more broad than that. And as I mentioned, currently our program has parameters, either students with disabilities, there is a income-based threshold component, and then also now the addition of students, children of law enforcement. They could expand that by increasing the income level so that more students qualify, which would still have some parameters on it, but not be, but still, you know, be a bigger program. Or they could just say everyone. Now that would be a major shift in how we do education services and also how we fund education. So something to think about that I know I've been thinking about and we've been having discussions of here is, if we go to a more a la carte method, forgive me, that's the best way I can think of to describe it, that we're going to do education services, school districts are going to need to think about how we charge, if you will, for things. What do things cost, if that's going to be the option, that students could maybe take a course here and then take a course at another school or take a virtual course. And then also, if there are requirements, so currently this for students with disabilities that qualify for some of these scholarships, there are oftentimes requirements that they have some testing that is done at the school district level. So there's also a kind of a recording piece, because the scholarships now run through the FEFP, so they go through the district and then back out to the scholarship funding organizations and to the students and their parents. That requires a level of work at the district office. You probably have one or a number of individuals who from time to time have those responsibilities for doing those requirements right now. If we expand this greatly, if we see an even bigger program where districts have more responsibility, I think it's going to be important for us to think about including in that legislation how we ensure that districts are made whole for anything that you all are providing, just the same way that any of the private providers would get paid for any of the services that they provide.
Thank you. Do you have any specific voices or any specific legislators that are more in favor of this, that are the ones having these conversations?
I would say, generally speaking, the majority of the legislature is very, very supportive of these types of programs. Legislative leadership, particularly on the House side, though I will say the Senate president has also expressed her support for choice and expansion of options for students in the past, but particularly the incoming House Speaker has made it very clear that this is something that he wants. And as a result, I think you'd see the majority of the folks, at least in his party, would be very supportive of this type of program. And the governor, of course, too, who's indicated his support of wanting to continue to expand choice in Florida.
Can I ask, this is Erica Booth here. I'm trying to reach out to see, I didn't hear anything regarding mental health moving forward. Is there anything on the scope of what that might look like, or any priorities there for this upcoming session?
Yes, thank you. I should have mentioned that, and I apologize. A couple things on that. The Department of Education's legislative budget request did include additional dollars for mental health, so that shows at least a commitment on their end of what they see as an important priority. And then perhaps even more importantly, our Senate president Kathleen Passidomo, was the senator who, at the time in 2018, she was our education appropriations chair. She actually developed the mental health allegation. That was her big priority that year. Of course, then we had the shooting in Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, and they ended up kind of taking her program and putting a bunch of other things together to have the school safety bill. But that was something she championed. So we know that that's a priority for her. So I think seeing additional dollars in that categorical is highly likely with her in her position.
Okay, thank you.
How about VPK? Because I know right now VPK is part of the Early Learning Coalition, and they give us money for like the first 3 hours. But Title I is not state. I think that's a federal government program where they help the parents pay for the wraparound service. So the non-Title I schools are just kind of left, to their own devices to pay for that additional component. Do you hear any possibilities of maybe increasing that VPK allocation?
There's certainly been talk and much more of a focus on early learning in the last couple of years than what we had seen in probably the 10 years prior. They did inject more money into early learning. I believe it was last year, it may have been the year before. There is an increased desire to see more dollars in those areas. They've also balanced that with trying to add some more accountability measures. It is challenging because most of the VPK providers are private providers. They aren't school districts, even though obviously school districts have VPKs. But that has been the balancing act that they've been trying to achieve, is how do you have accountability, but knowing that they are only funded, as you stated, for part of the day. It's not a full day, but at least what we would consider a full school day. But it's very much possible. There was talk this morning, in fact, in committee, looking particularly at literacy and what could be done in the realm of early literacy, because we know that when kids are coming into kindergarten and they haven't met a level of readiness, they're kind of starting the race behind, and to get them to that very vital third grade year where you want to have everyone reading on grade level, they're looking, kind of pushing back now and looking even further, not just to kindergarten but to VPK. So we may see additional dollars if there's any kind of associated requirements or programs that they would like to see in those VPKs to help with literacy.
I have one more. Okay, and maybe I came in a little bit late in the beginning. I know that naturally, over the past few years, the compression funding, which you did address here, Osceola tends to be very low in the state, and I know we've had extra efforts with that and some success. Is that something that we need to be really fighting for to get pushed forward with Osceola being more at the table to understand we're a high growth district and what that looks like?
Yes, and I certainly think you all have a great champion now with Rep. Tumkow being the pre-K-12 appropriations subcommittee chair. She is obviously going to be concerned about the counties within her district, and she can work to either see increases perhaps in compression funding, for example, that might help raise the money that you all have to spend, or other areas. The hold harmless compression funding really was developed for districts like Osceola to try to make up that difference between what the average is and where you all fall, which is below. So she could go that route. They could look at just what we already have in place, or adding additional funds in other ways as well.
Do you feel that would be a priority of ours to continue?
I would think, especially because the compression issue is just year to year right now. If we got something that was more permanent, if it became recurring dollars, that gives you a little more confidence in the ability to have that from year to year. But right now, we really are dependent on the legislature including it every year, and so we have to fight for it every year. So I would say continuing to do that, and then maybe even asking that it be made permanent would be a wonderful thing, and then you could maybe shift your attention elsewhere from that time.
you.
Thank you.
Team, do we have any other questions that we want to bring up before we end the workshop?
I think I'm good right now.
We really need direction, Madam Chair, from the board about what you all want your legislative priorities to be, or at least some discussion about that process and to see if we have consensus on specific areas.
Yeah, I think she mentioned the compression overall, right? Just kind of summarizing what she mentioned, and if I interpreted incorrectly, let me know. We have the salary compression as well, as far as like the veteran teachers to starting teachers salaries. We had minimum wage compression, I think she was mentioning. Now, for minimum wage compression, is that just increasing the BSA in order to get to that level?
BSA is where you have your flexibility
Right.
as a board to determine how you want to spend it. More money for mental health, more money for safety and security. While all of those needs are great, they are restricted to those specific needs. Whereas the increases in the BSA can be used specifically for salaries, particularly perhaps for like support staff salaries or non-bargaining salaries, because they don't benefit from any increases in the teacher salary allocation categorical.
Okay. And then Ms. Booth mentioned something about mental health, which can be a broad category. Do you want to try to narrow it down for them to say, okay, is there something specific on mental health to like either like an extra, like,
I know there's a
know what I mean,
requirement,
like-
as a teacher, I know there's a requirement that they're having to be trained a certain number of hours, and moving forward, even if, more so if you're putting forth a bill or something, what's the funding piece around that going to look like on our end? Is it going to be followed through and funded properly, or what, is that something we need to keep an eye on for the mental health piece?
right? Kind of like an unfunded mandate. So if they mandate something new for mental health compliance, that they fund it.
Just that conversation.
One thing that can help us to have a united message with mental health, because it sounds like this is very close to what FSBA is already advocating for as well, is exactly what you said, which is increase the mental health allocation to permit for more evidence-driven health services. So it sounds like we're asking for more of an allocation for mental health. Did I get that right?
And then
Or-
each year, the district has to submit a board-approved mental health plan to the state to indicate how the district plans to use that mental health allocation within certain guidelines and restrictions. So for example, within that mental health allocation, we paid for the youth mental health first aid training, train the trainer model. We now have 2 members at each campus who can provide the training, but it's a very restrictive training. It can only be a certain number of people within that room. It's required face-to-face. It's 6 hours. So it's a pretty significant requirement. But we're also then providing stipends for staff members to attend the training on Saturday mornings or in the evenings, or we're going to offer some over spring break. We offered some on the January 3rd teacher workday. You also have within that some positions, additional social workers, additional guidance counselors at the schools to provide mental health services. And then we also have contracts with, I believe, about 14 local mental health providers, that was the last count, who will provide services to our families. If they're eligible for Medicaid reimbursement, they'll pursue that. And if not, the district reserves a certain pot of money for families who need the mental health services but can't afford to pay for it. So those are some different things that are in that plan now.
Is there anything missing in that plan? Like, I remember we approved that plan. Is there anything that is missing in order to implement that plan? Because we may write the plan, but are we dependent on the legislature to do something in order for that plan to be executed?
That plan is dependent on the continuation of the current categorical with increases to cover any increased costs or additional services the district wants to provide.
Okay, so that would be my request then, since the board did approve the mental health plan, that we kind of ask our folks in Tallahassee to maintain that mental health allocation at the levels they're in, because they can always decrease the allocation. We don't always automatically assume that the allocation is going to roll over year to year, that they sustain that
But
allocation.
is there a gap though?
They need to increase the allocation.
Yeah.
I mean, the needs for mental health are certainly great in our community. We could expand current services. I don't know that we're not providing a service, so to
Sure.
speak. But additional dollars would allow you to expand the services that you're able to provide. You just have to know that it's sustainable. That's.
As far as policy-wise, though, there's nothing stopping it, right? Like, if we use a mix of in-house versus providers, because I know sometimes we depend on hiring outside providers, does anything in the state, because everything's easy to go money, 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 but is there anything statutorily wise in the language that may need to change to allow us to do something?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. You know what I'm trying to say? Because sometimes it's easier just to
It's
ask
not
for
my area
a
of
couple words to
expertise.
change around as opposed to always asking for more money, because everyone's asking for more money.
It's not my area of expertise, but not to my knowledge. It's been a huge positive impact since the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act to have that specific pot of money to provide the very necessary services, compounded even more so by the pandemic.
Are we keeping track of the results of that or the efficiency of our efforts so that we're not just asking money and then we have no idea if somebody would ever ask, well, what are the results of your program? Well, the results of our program are that we're asking for more money, but instead that we actually have some results that we can point to saying
We
that this
have to
was.
provide specific data each year, actually, I believe each quarter, to the state showing what we've used the services for and how many students have been served. Yes, so that is reported on a
But
regular
I mean, like,
basis.
that's the expenditure itself, right? But what about the result? Is it having a positive impact on our community or our student body so that we can say this money is well spent? Not only is it responsibly spent, but that this is having an impact or affecting them.
I don't know that the money, that the dollars and the data is tracked back to improvements in student achievement, but we are reporting things like student attendance and number of Baker Acts, those types of things.
Because what are the things that because I think Mr. Agoura has a good point of like outcome-based, but what are some of the inputs for a student to qualify for mental health? Is it like, because maybe it's like not academic, maybe it's more like discipline issues, like they've been getting a bunch of detentions. Let's say they average 10 detentions a month, I'm making it up, a total fake number. But then after receiving treatment, are we then able to show, okay, now they're averaging only 3 detentions, before they're averaging 10 detentions? You know what I mean? Is there a way to kind of measure that outcome, so to speak, of receiving services?
I can certainly work with Dr. Torres and her department to see. I think the most significant outcomes that we see right now are improvements in anger management, improvements in attendance, less Baker Acts, fewer suicides, because those are the things that we really struggled with for a little bit. Not as much as completed suicides, but attempted suicides a couple of years ago, and that we've seen that go down.
Right. And that's
Or
a hard metric.
improvements in discipline
Right,
at this, throughout the district.
right.
That's probably the biggest indicator of,
It
why
is.
we are where we're at.
The challenge from a statistical standpoint is tracking that with some of the other contributing factors that we know have led to more discipline challenges in schools across the country.
Yeah. That's the hard part. I know what you're saying. You can't isolate it to one thing. You can't say they got in trouble because it's one thing and that there wasn't something else that influenced that.
And there's a level of confidentiality, but we do know to whom the dollars are going and what services they are supposed to be providing. And within our provider agreements with outside agencies, there is a sharing of just the basic information, not specific details, but this student completed 6 sessions, blah, blah, blah. Does that make sense?
Can I ask another question? Now, I'm new to the board, so could you explain, Dr. Pace, a little bit more about our local capital funds? Like, is there any danger of folks trying to take away that ability for us to use our local funds here locally from the sales tax revenue, or to be put somewhere else? If you could speak a little bit on that for
It's been a couple of years since we were able to successfully negotiate that through our lobby team to get changes in the statute so that if you're using local dollars, you don't have to get state approval for those dollars. We still have to submit a plan for any capital project that we're building, but if you're using capital dollars, because of the challenges with the way that, what's it called?
Required local effort?
No, not the required local effort, but the reports that we have to do that cover size and seats of schools.
Oh, cost per student station.
Cost per student station is one, and that is an area where there is still a need to have some changes in lobbying legislation because of the inflation that's occurred, particularly in the area of capital work. But no, it's the spot surveys we used to have to do. And, you know, with the spot survey in the past, if you were using any capital dollars from the state or elsewhere, you had to be able to prove that there was a need for a school. And if you had capacity in, say, for example, Deerwood, but you needed capacity in Harmony, you couldn't necessarily add a wing or build a new school. Well, we changed, that was changed through the work of our lobbyists and our legislature, so that you have more flexibility. There were a couple of high-growth districts that worked together on that process, Santa Rosa in the Panhandle being one of them. St. John, Santa Rosa, and Osceola are probably, I would say, our most high-growth in the state right now in terms of continued growth. But right now, we don't get state dollars for capital projects, so to speak. We can use a little bit of our property tax values that come in, but our capital projects, as you know, are primarily funded through impact fees and our sales tax initiatives. Impact fees for new student stations, sales tax for things like our transportation centers, and capital maintenance, renovation, those projects.
Is there an additional need to keep that message going, that this is what's working? Or, I mean, did it start in Osceola? I don't know the history of, like, or did the coalition came together, or how did that work?
We worked, the team worked with several other districts that had similar needs in order to get that language across.
Is that something that, is that something that we need to work on our lobbying efforts for, or?
There's been no discussion whatsoever of changing that or doing away from that, because right now, the only state capital dollars are going to charter schools, which is good, because that means then we don't share our impact fees and sales tax at this stage of the game.
Dr. Pace.
Dr. Pace, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
please correct me, Sarah and Jessica, if I'm
Jessica,
speaking.
I don't know if you want to speak to it. I was just going to mention the other thing is the conversation that continues to come up is sharing our local capital dollars with the charter schools. And OPAGA just came out with a survey along those lines. So Jessica, I don't know if you've even seen that OPAGA survey yet, or where that conversation may be headed.
Yes, so that is something that we are taking a look at, because essentially the report indicated it would probably be a good idea to have charters have kind of a plan, much like we operate on the school district level, where you look at growth and you just see where you need buildings, and you build basically based on growth and not just to build a school. But then there would be they also recommended some sharing. So that has not come up with the legislature yet, though I would imagine it will at some point during this legislative session because of that report. So we're going to keep our eyes on that for sure. And then also to mention cost per student station. I've had conversations with folks at the department before committee meetings started, because we thought, and I still believe that the department could maybe take some action on their own looking at cost per student station. But now that we're here in the legislative process, what we were thinking about doing is either asking that there be kind of a pause on those limits for cost per student station because of the extraordinary inflation levels that we see, particularly in construction costs. I mean, I know we've seen it across the board, but for anyone that's building anything, it's been pretty dramatic. So asking for just either a pause on that. There are other ways to go about it, but we have been gathering information from school districts and sharing that with the department and with legislators so that they can see the real time costs and the real increases that we're seeing for projects that, have been in the queue for many years. So, it's not like this is something that hasn't been thought out. It, of course, has been, but we've just seen pretty extraordinary inflation. So we are going to work on that as well.
Yeah, you read my mind, Jessica, because that was going to be my next question, because Casa Student Station, we've had Mr. Clinch, our facilities director, already tell us we're way over that number. And these weren't like the Taj Mahal of schools either. We tried to value engineer as best we can, but just materials cost, labor cost, we're going to far exceed it. So I don't know what we're going to do this year. Are we just going to just let the Department of Education just write us a letter and say, hey, it's so sad because we can't reduce it anymore?
We can actually submit a waiver request to the Department of Education because we are using local dollars. Because you're using impact fee dollars to build those new costs or your sales tax dollars to provide those renovations, you can demonstrate that you've worked toward meeting that limit, but you can request a waiver. And they have been very generous, I can say, in terms of their approval of that process. The biggest challenge that we're running into now, and I'm sure Mark and Dave will talk about it at the workshop at 4 o'clock, is that you can't find site work people. As you know, at Gateway, we had 3 bids on site work, and before it was over, all 3 of those bids said, no, thank you, we don't want to do that job. And that is true across the industry, and talking to my people who I know in the industry.
Yeah, because Jessica, so we're not looking at just maybe waiving, we're looking at maybe a recalculation of that formula. Like they use more current data to update what the cost of student station should be. Because it's nice to say, hey, we're waiving it. No, we're not really waiving it. They should include more recent data in that calculation in order to have a more realistic expectation of what school districts should do.
Absolutely. The legislature can do that. So we've been trying to share information from various projects where we've seen, pretty dramatic increases with districts that are building new schools that, was supposed to cost X million dollars, and now we're looking at 10 million more just because of the cost of labor and then also materials. So we are trying to share that message, and perhaps there's a better way to do it than what we've been doing in the past. Maybe we need to come back and look at it every couple of years, or maybe just in these instances where we have extraordinary inflation, it gets revisited. But certainly all options are on the table to try to account for this.
Thank you. Good.
So,
Jessica, I have a question. How would you compare other school districts' priorities with ours?
I would say there's a lot of overlap, at least just based on the discussion that I've heard and the one pager that I got. The issues of salary compression are probably some of the most talked about, I would say, from a school district perspective, both from teachers, but then also your employees with your minimum wage. I think I'm hearing that across the board. Obviously, the funding compression, that is limited to the districts that benefit. Those are the ones that lobby for that. But we have worked collectively as a group in the past, and I'm certain we'll do the same again. But those are major issues. And then looking at hearing what you all discussed now with regard to mental health, that is also a major issue that we're hearing people talk about, just the increase in Baker Acts and all the different challenges that school districts are facing.
Is there anything going on that you think that we should add that would be advantageous to our district?
You all kind of discussed it, so maybe it's included, and I apologize, I was trying to take notes, but I do think, asking for an increase in the BSA is always a positive thing just because it is flexible dollars. So that does give you a little more flexibility. So in addition to asking for these things, that may be something you want to consider. And then just depending on your current situation at the district, when it comes to teacher shortage or just an employee shortage overall, what kind of solutions you all think you would like to see on the table would be something. I have a feeling we're going to have a bill that looks at teacher shortage.
Dr. Pace, thank you, Jessica. Oh, I'm sorry, are you
Go ahead.
Dr. Pace, we talked about there is a sector of teachers that are not passing some of their certifications, and that's maybe part of the formula of what's causing it's not the whole picture, obviously, but it is part of the formula of what's causing some teachers to leave the profession. Can you speak a little bit about that? And is there something that we can add to our priorities?
The most challenging aspect for new teachers to the profession is that they have a limited amount of time to complete a lot of requirements. Because currently, there are some that have to be done in the very first year, some that you have up to 3 years, and then you no longer have a temporary certificate, and you must sit out a year before you can get there. So that includes things like mandatory ESOL training, particularly in districts like ours, with a highly diverse population. That includes pardon me? The reading endorsement. If they are an ESE teacher, they often have to add separate subject areas to their certificate, which is not only a requirement of time and task and energy, but it's also money. $250 every time you need to do one of these things. So a couple of the things that FAD has talked about advocating for, and I believe are included in the superintendent's legislative platform, is extending that professional certification or that temporary certification to 5 years instead of 3, and giving everybody that entire time period in order to do X, Y, Z. Because particularly with over half of the teachers entering the profession coming from a non-educationally trained background, they're also figuring out the whole art of teaching, managing the classroom, building the relationships, communicating with parents, planning for lessons, and differentiating instruction. So there's a lot that goes into that during those first few months and first few years, actually, from my experience as a teacher before I figured it out. And we want to try to give them more support and more time. Our mentoring program continues to be of value in terms of what I hear from teachers, but it's an expense. It's primarily funded out of ARP, which goes away in September of 2024. And if we want to prioritize more money directly to salaries, then we're going to have to look at some of those programs that may be nice to have, but not absolutely essential to the work, to repurpose those dollars and change the way we use our resources. That's a board policy discussion.
Is there any talk, Jessica, about loosening the degree requirements for specific teaching criteria jobs? Because in my example, right, I'm not qualified to teach law studies for middle school with a law degree. So I imagine that it's even, if you have a master's of science of some sort, of chemistry, you still can't go teach some science classes. And it just seems kind of, maybe if they loosened up some of these barriers or unnecessary barriers, then people would find it easier to get into the profession.
I've heard a general conversation about flexibility overall. So loosening of maybe some requirements, an extended timeline, like Dr. Pace mentioned, I've heard that discussed a lot because there does seem to be, it just seems to be a major challenge to be embarking on your first couple of years of teaching and then also trying to do take all these tests and fulfill all these requirements. Another idea has been having some sort of program that will help pay for those costs because if you're taking a test, particularly if you have to take it more than once because you don't pass it the first time, that becomes a major expense for someone just embarking on their career. So I have heard about kind of all of those things. The commissioner, and this has been in more general topics, kind of in conference settings where I've heard him allude to, basically everything's on the table right now as part of the discussion because we really want to get at this issue from multiple directions.
One of the other challenges that we have that some teachers are really upset about is the fact that if they get a master's in curriculum and instruction, as opposed to in a specific certification area, it doesn't qualify for the master's degree supplement. And that is something that's a source of heartburn. That changed in 2011. People who had master's degrees and were receiving a supplement prior to that are grandfathered in. But if a teacher moves to a different district, one may award a master's degree supplement because it's in their certification area, and one may not. So that is another area where we believe there should be maybe some consideration provided. Because a master's degree is that degree of advanced study in the practice of education. I mean, if you had a master's degree in basket weaving, maybe not, unless you were teaching basket weaving. But a master's degree in curriculum and instruction is all about how do we plan more deeply and more effectively for instruction.
So that was a statute, I didn't know that was a statutory issue. I thought that was a local district requirement that we did.
No, 2011, that requirement changed when they introduced basically the performance pay concept.
Right.
It was all one big bundle.
Well, then, to me, then that needs to be absolutely included in the priority for this year. Not only would I say master's degree in curriculum and instruction, but I would also say master's degree in ed leadership, because some of them want to become a principal. In order to become a principal, you have to have a master's degree in ed leadership. So if somebody wants to get a master's degree in math, because they want to be a better math teacher, then they want to be in a leader position, now you have to ask them to get 2 master's degrees. And that's a lot of schooling for somebody who wants to be a principal. Because if I want to be a principal, I shouldn't say, you know what, I'm not going to get my advanced degree in math because, you know what I'm trying to say? Like, you're having them choose one curriculum track versus another. And sometimes you want them to be the best teacher they can be. And if they are the best teacher they can be, then they want to become a leader, you know?
You don't have to be a principal or an assistant principal or an administrator to get a master's degree supplement for ed leadership, as long as you have the degree credentials and you apply to add educational leadership to your certificate, it still qualifies. This is how weird the law is.
No, I'm talking about like if you're a math, let me get it confused. Maybe I'm confusing myself. I'm a math teacher, right? I don't know if I want to be a principal yet. I'm thinking about it.
Right.
And I have a bachelor's degree in math, for instance. And I'm choosing what direction to go for my master's. I'm like, I may want to get my master's in ed leadership because I may want to be a principal later down the road. But then I'm still teaching. I got my master's degree in ed leadership, and you're saying that doesn't qualify me to get an extra supplement because I don't.
No, that's
have a
not what I'm
master's.
saying. I'm saying that ed leadership would qualify because it's a certification area. There is no certification area for curriculum and instruction.
Oh,
There's
okay.
actually, the school I just came from, this is very real. There's 2 teachers at my school that I came from with that exact issue. And when you're talking about retention of staff, they see, I went to, I don't call it the college, I went to a certain college, which was accredited at the time, and I'm having this issue, and now I can't get the step, or I don't want to use the word step, but I can't get the supplement and pay for my master's. There's 2 right now that
There are more than 2
they may be
across our
thinking
district.
about, but that's at my particular environment where I just came from, so.
And
it's very
even
real.
going back to Mr. Arguello's point, the Juris Doctorate doesn't necessarily qualify for the doctoral supplement. When I was doing HR in Brevard, we did tweak that for a specific teacher who was teaching law studies, but it's a stretch, which, that doesn't make sense.
I wonder if we can narrow
But you can't
down-
teach social studies.
Okay, so ed leadership
I
does
mean, it's just
qualify. We're just trying to include
barriers.
curriculum and instruction.
I would just say if you have a master's degree in something related to education or in a content area, it should earn a master's degree.
Or maybe even broader, because I mean, it's just the timing, right? So if we're dealing with a labor crisis, you tell somebody, well, here's a $3,000 more, the difference between 53,000 and 50,000, that's the difference, why would you tell them no? I mean, I would bring them in, right? So, I mean, chances are they're bringing in expertise, a different experience, a different whatever. And I think that education in general has created its own echo chamber where you have to be wholly anointed from a university of education in order to come be a part. And maybe that's created some of the problems that we have. So why not open it up to people with a little bit more diverse academic profiles and let them come? Bring your master's, bring your doctorate.
As long as it's still a
and
certified
come
school,
and
it's
teach.
not like a
Yeah.
master's degree from a
Yeah, it's-
uncredited school.
I wonder if we can narrow down the conversation to what our priorities should be, just because we have 15 minutes before the next.
I think that would be one, because it would reduce the pressure on our labor crisis.
Can you articulate that? Because I don't really know
Yeah,
what.
to, basically to, if we can, to remove the barriers for teachers coming in, into the profession from other fields. Or remove the barriers from us being able to give teachers raises, in this case through a supplement for additional education. Instead of just having these unnecessary barriers that prevent their growth, either financial or job-wise.
And if the board has consensus around that and these other issues, then I will work with Jessica and Mr. Boyd and Dana to prepare a draft legislative flyer, because Olay's visit to Tallahassee's coming up, and those are typically things that we like to lay on people's desks so that, we can leave
I'd like to include
behind
that in the
something that they remember. I think I see consensus on that issue.
Yeah. So it sounds like we had the cost differential, mental health, compression, certification, something. We don't know what yet. Did we miss anything?
BSA.
The BSA increasing.
Increasing BSA?
And I think in terms of compression, we want to be very specific in that we want to address the per-student funding compression as well as the salary compression, unless you guys direct me otherwise, but I know that that's been something that the board has discussed. Okay?
Yep.
John and Jessica, do you feel like you have enough notes to go from there?
I do.
Okay, great. We'll schedule a follow-up call, and then we'll have a draft flyer for you guys.
Okay, yeah, the only other thing was maybe, because I know you can only ask so much in 1 year, you don't want to overwhelm it, but then just something to consider is like the Early Learning Coalition and the VPK and maybe augmenting those efforts.
Okay.
One thing that
I've asked my team to set up a meeting with you, Mr. Melendez, to go over how that funding works in that budget so that we can work from a place of understanding.
Basic understanding. Okay, I'm fine.
Okay. Anyone else? Questions, comments? We good? We good? Yes? Okay. Meeting adjourned. See you in 15 minutes.
Are you here to work on the Wi-Fi issue? Well, you want to work with him in the back. You couldn't get WebEx to work with me.
Thank you, Jessica.
It sounded good in theory.
There you go.